Okay. Okay. We will begin. I'm just going to move over this so that I can let everyone in. So I emailed everybody the files, the sheet we're using. So you should have it, although I will put it on the screen sometimes, but everyone should have one of these booklets. I sent it to the email. You should have that. If not, most of it's on the screen.
Do we need pens for the test?
I don't think so. Well, we're not going to spend too much time on it. It's more to pretend like I'm open to other ideas. One of the challenges is that people are very committed, were very committed, let me say, to certain ideas about a two-state solution and the inevitability of it and the necessity of it. It's been something which has been part of the ecosystem since 1967, and for sure since the successful Camp David Accords with Egypt. So it became the norm, and it somehow Israel became trapped in this narrative of land for peace, although it doesn't really exist anywhere else that somebody fought a defensive war, conquered land from an enemy, and then we're told, if you want us to accept you or have peace, give us the land that you conquered from us when we attacked you. It doesn't exist anywhere else, but it has begun, it did begin to exist with Israel. That did become the conversation. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to take a look at the Torah viewpoint of this issue. In other words, there's a unique Torah perspective, despite the fact that there are disagreements in how you actually translate these Torah values in real life, but the essential qualities are pure Torah, that even the differing sides of Jews who believe in Torah agree with the essentials. So we're going to make an argument that that the Torah viewpoint, the values of the Torah, are something that we could look at and be able to run our lives with, and that the state of Israel could do the same as well. All right, let's jump in for a moment. We don't have to cover everyone. Does anyone want to share 3 reasons why we should allow for the creation of a Palestinian state? We're trying to see both sides of argument. In other words, to be able to to understand the, I would say the core of the Torah approach. It's right there, you have a handout as well, Sandy, if you don't mind, right there, grab that. It's good to hear the perspectives of what exists in the secular world or in the world at large. Okay, anyone want to share a reason for a Palestinian state? It's become much more difficult now after what happened in Gaza, what was perpetrated by the terrorists who were given a state by Israel, by retreating. And what they did makes it very difficult for, I think, many people to even visualize the acceptability. But if you had to give an argument, as a lover of Israel, why should there be a Palestinian state? Anyone want to jump in?
I think there is already a Palestinian state.
Okay, there already is one.
Called Jordan.
Okay, there is a Palestinian state called Jordan. There's no need for another. You're not good at this. It's okay. Give us an argument that you heard in your synagogue or from other people that you're friendly with.
International pressure.
International pressure.
And there's also, you mentioned it before. Let's just say international pressure for now.
International pressure. Okay. Any other reasons that anyone else wants to come up with online that have something? Rivka, you want to share something?
Yeah, a people should be free. That's a basic necessity.
People should be free. Very good.
In general, right. The people
right.
should be free.
In other words, if they are a people, they should be free. And if they should be free, they should have a state. And if they should have a state, it should be somewhere. And if it should be in the land of Israel is already a conversation. But people should be free. The right for self-determination. Okay? We're gonna come back to that. In other words, what's fascinating to me, I mentioned last time, is that in the Arab world, you have these three movements of the Iranians, the Saudi Arabians, and the Turks, each one wanting to create a caliphate in their own image. The Ottoman Empire wants a caliphate. Iran wants the caliphate of the Shiite variety. Saudi Arabia wants its sphere of influence in the Sunni variety. Egypt wants its Sunni variety too. They all want to swallow up other states. All the states in the Middle East right now, the Arab states, are either failed states or states that want to swallow up someone else, or are at the cusp of being failed states, whether it's Lebanon or Syria or Jordan at the precipice, Egypt having all sorts of challenges. And all these groups are saying we want a pan-Arab nation state or an Islamic caliphate, they're saying. There's only one land that they say they want a state. It's so 19th century, Palestinian State. But the same people who want the Palestinian State are saying they want a caliphate. But all right, let's just say that Rivka's point, in other words, that we're buying into that a nation should be free and they should be able to have their state and be able to hold on to it and defend it. It has to be defendable and it has to be sustainable. Okay, let's jump for 3 reasons why Israel should not allow for the creation of a state. Unless anyone wants to add something else. In other words, we have international pressure, the right of self-determination for a people. Yes?
And you mentioned it before, land for peace.
That we should give them a land because we will get peace, we may get peace, we should get peace. We're not sure of the variation, but let's just accept it that we will get peace. Let's work with that assumption. Okay, so land for peace, we'll give it to them, okay? Number 2 is they deserve a state. Number 3, international pressure, right or wrong. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
What would be different?
A very good question. That's the next answer. Give me 3 reasons why Israel should not allow for the creation of a Palestinian state. Oh, you're asking what is different from what they have right now?
Yeah. I mean, what would change?
Right.
If they suddenly declared, okay, you've got your own state.
Right. Israel would not be able to keep on invading every time. It'd be much more difficult for them. There'd be a lot more pressure and a lot more allies being created, where if they went in every time after terrorists or after when they allowed terrorism to flourish and support it, it'll be that much more difficult. Israel won't be able to control necessarily the airspace. They can't, in other words, to give a Palestinian state without the ability for them to have their own airspace and their own borders and their own entry and exit, which is what happened in Gaza. They started bombing Israel, and Israel was forced to close the border. So then all of a sudden they say, hey, it's a prison. Right, it's a prison because you guys are trying to kill us. It's not fair, it's a prison. Yeah, stop trying to kill us, you won't be in prison. So the point though is, if there is a state, and they have an army, and they have alliances, and they have, and they're able to have control of the airspace. There are a lot of issues that will make Israel much more endangered than it is right now. In other words, what happened in Gaza, what happened in the West Bank, and the West Bank is much closer to the center of Israel and much broader than Gaza is. If the West Bank had what Gaza had, we would have had 200,000 people killed without question. God forbid. In other words, if we had followed through with the state to give the West Bank a state,
So in other words, it would be even worse.
much, much worse if they radicalized like Gaza. And another question about, hey, maybe they would turn to Switzerland. Maybe they would turn to Luxembourg. Maybe the Palestinian Arabs would modify, which we'll get back to in a second. The maybes, we're going to discover Jewish law does not necessarily have to assume the worst of people, as we're going to see, but nevertheless, Jewish law has an approach that says that precautions to protect lives, despite what the situation is right now, but what the situation could become, is the imperative. I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but we're going to see there are many competing values in Jewish law, but the one that trumps everything is protection of lives, the obligation and the responsibility to protect your nation, your city, your state, your neighborhood, your family, that yourself, that trumps everything when someone's trying to kill
Rabbi,
you.
excuse me, you asked,
Yes.
you put me in a corner here. In
No,
no
I'm
way
sorry.
do I think, no way do I think uh,
I know.
that they
Rivka, I
should be
know.
a state. I was hypothetical,
Yo,
that
you're
people
good.
should be
Yeah,
free,
yeah,
but
no,
not those people.
yeah, Rivka, I'm sorry. I apologize. No, you did good. Everyone else was struggling with the homework. You did good. You were able to see the other side of the argument. I'm just giving the back and forth. No, you did good. No, 100%. And how about this? Another argument: the demographics. If the Arabs are annexed in the West Bank, what do the demographics look like? What does it happen? Or can you keep them as resident aliens? Can they have residency rights and not be citizens? So what does that mean? Although it does exist again in the Middle East, in many, many countries, things like that. Even in our country in some ways. Okay, so I just want to throw out these ideas at both sides. And there is international pressure, there is demographics, there is the rights of people. These are all issues. Now, this is something we discussed last week, so I want to get into it to connect it a little bit. Let's see if I can do this. To go down. Nope, not doing that here. Let's try that. Nope, I gotta move it here.
Rabbi, can I just ask one thing?
Yeah, I don't see you, but 1 second. Please interject.
There.
Who is this?
Okay, there's a lot there. It's Diane.
I don't see you. I don't see you. Who's talking?
Oh, it's Diane.
Okay,
I
Diane,
don't have my.
Diane, write down your questions. Yeah, because I want to get into this. A lot of stuff to cover. Write down your questions, and then we'll come back. Okay?
Well, it's just a statement. I just think there's a lot of land in the Middle East. Can't some of the neighbors that they seem to really get along with take them in and create a state for them?
That's a different issue, but it is an interesting question. And the reality is that in 1948, the fledgling Jewish state was attacked, and many of the neighboring countries, and even within the Arab territory, the Arab civilians there, were told, pull out, we're going to kill the Jews, and then you will have your land. And many fled. Others fled because of the fighting. Others were forced out of certain areas. And ultimately, the Arab states did not resettle any refugees. And the reality is 100 million refugees were resettled post-World War II, except for one group. The Palestinians were given a special agency by the UN in order to perpetuate their refugee status in order to apply pressure on Israel. In other words, the entire structure, whoever's on, please just mute yourself. The entire structure of the UN refugee movement for the Palestinians was to put pressure on Israel and not to reintegrate them into the other Arab countries, despite the fact that close to 800,000 Jews fled or under threat of life and death from Arab countries into Israel. There was a population exchange. So despite all that, nevertheless, the Arab nations used the refugee crisis as a weapon to hit the Jews with. Okay, let's just go a bit further though, we'll come back. Please put yourself on mute. Maybe I'll do mute all somehow. Mute all, can I do that?
Yeah.
I'm not sure why it's not showing up.
I guess, when I said what would change, it was sort of a rhetorical question. Because I think you could give them a new state, but the aggression
Right,
that they're constantly facing is,
Right.
I don't believe would ever change.
right now we're seeing this very clearly. Okay, so just last week we touched on different claims to land. If you look at the screen, we had historical claims, Jewish survival claims, international law, and biblical claims. So I want to throw out a question, really it's more of an exercise here. If you try to apply, for the state of Israel, we applied historical. Jews have always been in the land with an unbroken chain going back to Abraham. And we have records going back to First Temple period and even when you excavate with a Bible and a pickaxe, you uncover Jewish coinage, Jewish references going all the way back. But how about the West Bank? How does that do historically? Much more. If you're going to tell me the land of Israel belongs to the Jews because of historically, the West Bank is where King David was. The 10 tribes are from the rest of Israel, the other parts of Israel that are expelled, but much of the West Bank is where the Jews are through the Second Temple period, with the Maccabees. In other words, unbroken chain. How do I shut people? Mindel, show me. How do I mute everyone? Oh, mute all, thank you. It's your left, it's not mine. Okay, good. You did good. Okay, the point is, if you're going to look at the West Bank from a historical point of view, that's just as much, and Jerusalem too.
It's almost the opposite now.
It's almost the opposite now.
Because the Philistines, right? I mean, the story.
They were on that, they were right near.
Going to Ashdod to this area.
Right, so you had Philistines, but again, and then you had, after the Philistines, you had, in the time period of the Second Temple, you had Greeks. All the Greeks were along the coast. They were mixed cities, or Hellenized cities, or Greek cities. That's why you see all the beautiful aqueducts and Herod stuff. That becomes the, what's that beautiful, that everyone goes to? Caesarea. All those type of places. So those were non-Jewish cities in the land of Israel, although there were Jews there, but the cities were primarily based on the Greek and then Roman cities later on. Okay, Jerusalem, also historical. If you're talking about Jewish survival, so in other words, the state of Israel, we spoke about last week that the state of Israel served as a place for Jews to be protected and saved. So right now, the West Bank, well, once we conquered in 67, the question would only be, why do we need that land for survival is another question. And international law, the state of Israel, is a done deal pretty much, although there are people constantly trying to take away its right to exist. But in international law, it has a nice, good, strong standing. But the West Bank, Israel owning the West Bank, doesn't have the same. Although the reality is, although they call it occupied territories, the reality is that if anyone has, this was never a Palestinian state, there never was a Palestinian nation. This land was part originally, in the earlier period, in the early 1900s, was supposed to be part of a Jewish state. And then it was, we split off half to Jordan, but then afterwards even, this land at one point was promised to the Jews. And what happened was during 48, Jordan overran it, conquered it in the war against Israel, and never gave the Palestinian statehood. It was under Jordanian rule until 67, from 48. No one complained in the world about them not having a state. But you could argue that the Jews were the nation state that had a right to it more than anyone else, before anyone else, was part of the international mandate originally. It was. And then no one claimed it because the Arabs refused to accept the partition plan. They refused. All the Arab nations and the Arabs living in Israel refused to accept the partition plan and said we're going to go to war. So Israel conquered them in 67 defensive battle. One could make an argument that Israel has a greater right. The international community today does not. International community, and a lot of it is, with America as well, since George Bush Sr., before that with Carter, but with George Bush Sr., and then later on with Obama, and later before that with Clinton, they moved into this two-state narrative and that the settlements are illegal and all that, although many could argue it's disputed. But be that what it may, if you ask the international law as accepted today, many people would say the West Bank has less of a right. And how about Jerusalem? Why is West Bank different than Jerusalem? Because they're going to throw the Jews a bone and you get to share Jerusalem? It also was conquered. Oh, the Jews say we'll never give up Jerusalem. Why not? Why is Jerusalem different than the West Bank? If the land is Israel's yours, the biblical reasoning, because God gave it to you, it's all yours. Now, this doesn't mean, as we're going to discover, that just because God gave it to you, you have to go and conquer the original land of Israel. We're talking about now, it ended up in Jewish hands. And the question we have is, okay, what rights do we have to it, number one? Number two, much greater question, which we're going to say, is what is the obligation or even the right to create a Palestinian state with all the inherent dangers that exist with that? What were you going to say?
Yeah, there's something we're not talking about.
Yes.
And Jews can make claims to all of this, state,
Right.
nation, West Bank, because of power.
Correct. Possession is 9/10 of the law.
That's right. They've got the strongest army, the most effective army in the region, and that's why they're able to control it.
Right, but if there's no will to control it by the Israeli people, because Israeli people, like someone told me, an Israeli emailed me, he just saw my question in my email. He said, Rabbi, I disagree with you. I said, I didn't say anything yet. I just said we're going to explore it. He said, I disagree with you. How long can we live by the sword? Israelis were tired. Right now, because of what happened in Gaza, there's total
We've
realignment.
always lived by the sword.
Well, we didn't always in the sense of we moved from one place to another, and they hoped. The vision of the Zionist dream, like we learned last week, was we should be a nation like all other nations. We're going to normalize ourselves. If we just had our own state, everyone would respect us. There'd be no more anti-Semitism, Herzl said, because it'd be normal. And someone said, right, sure, right? And that's what happened. In other words, it didn't happen. But in other words, there is still a great movement in Zionism to normalize our existence, even though you don't live in the middle of Europe. Even Europeans don't live in Europe anymore. They're also living in the Middle East right now. So it's not that simple what's going to be there either. But for sure, the Jews living in the Middle East have a serious challenge. And that challenge is the fact that they wanted and they expected and they hoped for a time, why can't we just get along? We'll give you, what do you want to love us? Not love us. What can we give you to live with us? And right now, what has happened, we spoke about the first class, it moved away from nationalism that wanted to wipe out Israel, and now it's become a toxic mix of religious nationalism, or even not nationalism, religious triumphalism that wants to have the whole Middle East and ultimately the world under Allah. Whether it's Sunni or Shiite versions of it, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah versions of it. So we're in a place now where things have shifted and changed a lot in a revealed way. Yes?
I think it also is true that I think it's always been like that in some sense, right? Because it was a tragedy when Muslims and Jews were expelled from Spain, for example. That was a loss to the Muslim world. So they separated the world into two parts. Dar es Salaam is the Islamic part, and that is not supposed to shrink. That only is supposed to expand. I think it goes back centuries.
Right, but it became much more crazy since the 1970s when Islamic fundamentalism has become a form of political will and political power where for a long time it was dormant for 1,000 years. In other words, you had secular nationalists creating states in the wake of World War I, and they were all pan-Arab or secular states with a veneer of religiosity in order to control. But even the terrorist groups coming from Egypt, the Fedayeen or PLO, PFLP, they were communists. They were part of the Che Guevara. They were part of that's what they were. What happened? Hamas becomes in Israel becomes that religious Islamic Brotherhood, and Hezbollah is a little bit later in 1980s, 1981, around the same time. And before that, you have the state of Iran and an Islamic fundamentalist thing. And Saudi Arabia begins to fund Wahhabism, which leads to all these other things. So, full circle is that despite their desire for Spain, we don't see them attacking Spain the same way they're attacking the Jews. Yeah, one bombing here, a train bombing. I'm not minimizing it. But what happened here is a toxic mix of many, many things. The humiliation of the Jew ruling in the center of the Arab world is something that is very difficult for them. But again, many of them, the attitudes have shifted in a way that's become worse, not better. And not just because of what the Jews have done or not done, irrespective. You want to blame, you could blame America for supporting Afghanistan against Russia, or Iraq against Iran, or Iran against Iraq, trying to make these new spice roads that the West and Russia and America were fighting over, and the rest of the world and China. We could blame all sorts of things that unintended consequences that did happen, but the reality is the region has become radicalized in a way where you have non-state actors being funded or in some way by the big guys, which has become more toxic. Again, Egypt wanted to kill the Jews the same way in '67. And if you die, you die. In other words, they want to wipe them out too. But nevertheless, now it becomes something which is the new motivating principle for so many. Okay, let's take a look at some biblical ideas. What we're going to discover, just because something is a mitzvah, it's not a trump card. What I mean to say is, we're going to have competing values that we spoke about last week, how you have secular Zionism, you have in secular Zionism, you have those that were territorialists, there were those that wanted a culture, there were those that wanted to build an iron wall like Jabotinsky, and among the religious you had, like Mr. Levchenko brought up, the people she saw at the march who were protesting, looking like, dressed up like Hasidic Jews, saying that we should always be submissive to the nations, we should have no nation state until Messiah comes, and the state of Israel is against the Jews on one end of the spectrum, which we explained how it was nurtured, although corrupted by a belief that the Mashiach will bring Jews back to the land and bring them into a place of peace. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum, religious Jews, or what we call them religious Zionists, who say the state of Israel is a messianic vision, and it's being fulfilled, and all the biblical prophecies are coming back. So, and then you have the middle, which said that it is a gift from God, a miracle, but we are still in exile, and you can witness how we are subservient to the nations in the state of Israel as being the 51st state, or being something less than, even while we have some sort of autonomy from America and the West. Nevertheless, Israel can't even defend its integral, essential needs without kowtowing to what the world is saying. So if anyone thought, oh, you're truly free, that we're going to have, Am Chofshi, a free nation, the reality is, it ain't so free. And well, people could argue that the whole world is under superpowers. But be that what it may, you have the middle of the road saying it's a miracle, and we should try to live our life the best way we can according to Jewish law in Israel, but it's not yet the Messiah, it's exile. And the ultimate exile is when you're in the land of Israel and you're not acting like a Jew. Then you have the people on the left, I call them, which were the radical rejectionists of the state of Israel, who say, let's be under English mandate, UN, or some of them are saying even, let's be under Hamas or Hezbollah or Gaza or whatever it is, which is certifiably insane, and I would just say that. But it came from a place of rejection of the state of Israel as being that not the Jewish approach for what the ultimate will bring. Again, I'm rejecting them, but I'm explaining where they come from. But then you have the religious Zionists that see the land of Israel, everything happening with the state of Israel, as being an expression of a return to the land that God had prophesied. So then we come down to a big issue. If it's a mitzvah to conquer the land of Israel like it's in the Bible, let me ask you a question. First of all, is it a mitzvah? Take a look at number 2. Settling the land of Israel, conquering the land, retaining the land, 3 separate things. Are these mitzvot? On page 1 on the bottom. So to settle the land, to conquer the land, to move there, is that a biblical commandment today? To conquer the land, is that a commandment today? And how about if you have it already, do you have to keep it? Let me put it one way. If it's a mitzvah to conquer the land, what does conquering mean as far as risks to soldiers? Say something. You're nodding. Say it because they can't hear you. Acceptable risk. War means people are going to be killed. If you believe that it's a mitzvah to conquer the land of Israel, which, whether it's from the Nile to the Euphrates, or Transjordan as well, if you believe that, then it would be a commandment to conquer that too. Whatever was biblical Israel, you would have to conquer. Now, some of them would say, it's not a mitzvah to conquer the land today. We have no obligation to conquer, but that which we have is God's gift to us. But let's take a quick look at the biblical text. Look at Numbers, it's in the handout, and I'll switch to the PowerPoint in a minute. I hope everyone has these. In Numbers, it says, you'll take possession of the land and settle it, for I've assigned the land to you to possess. This is a biblical commandment. So Maimonides has a book of mitzvot, of commandments. He also has a book of law, 14 volumes. And when we discuss what law is, we look at these primary sources. For some reason, he does not count explicitly the commandment to live in Israel and to conquer the land of Israel as a commandment relevant today. So by reason of his omission, people debate whether he felt it was a commandment today. In exile, do we have to? Let's take a quick look. Nachmanides disagrees. Nachmanides is 1194, 1270. He disagrees with Maimonides, and he says we are commanded to take possession of the land that God, blessed be he, gave our forefathers, and not leave it in the hands of other nations or in desolation. This is what he says. You have to go and conquer it, possess it, divide it. And this is what our sages called an obligatory war. And they say, Yehoshua, Joshua's war of conquest, all agree is obligatory. David, who had wars for greater comfort, is optional. But when they say Joshua's war of conquest, you understand that you have to conquer. And I say that the mitzvah about which the sages spoke about at great length, living in the land of Israel, and you have to be there, that's all part of the positive precept, which are commanded to take possession of the land and dwell in it. If so, it's a positive precept for all generations, binding upon every individual, even during the time of exile. Now, 1 second. If I go and conquer the land, am I in exile anymore? When am I outside of exile? Nachmanides seems to be saying here it's a mitzvah to conquer the land of Israel, live in the land of Israel. But he starts off saying not conquering. He says not to leave it in the hands of other nations or in desolation. So we're going to have a few interpretations of this. I just want to give the full spectrum because religious Zionists will focus on these type of texts to say that it's a mitzvah today to have the land of Israel and to settle every part of it, even if it entails danger. When you conquer Hebron, they will say they'll say you have to settle it. Rebbe would say, well, who's going to protect you if you're there? If the Israeli government's not behind you and is not going to protect you, do we have to risk lives? The Rebbe's approach would be the more, which we're going to see, is really the code of Jewish law, that there's God gives us things with miracles, and we have to defend our people. But as we'll see, what is more important, the people or the land? If you believe that there's a mitzvah to conquer the land, that means you could even risk soldiers' life. But if you say, no, it's all about defensive war to defend the people, you may also come up with the same result, that you have to hold on to Hebron and to Gaza and to the West Bank. You may come up with the same result, but it's important to understand the logic behind it. The logic here seems to be saying it's a mitzvah to conquer land, or at least to live in it and to get it under your possession. What are you going to say, Dr. Levchenko?
No, I was just going to say that you gave the dates, and the dates overlap with the Crusades.
Absolutely.
So I think maybe his view of that was, okay, well, you see people going through the Holy Land, they try to conquer it. Maybe we should have the same ideas, as opposed to some other people seeing that it's not going to happen anyway.
Maimonides is also the time of the Crusades. Richard the Lionheart. In other words, everyone of the medieval period was the time of the Crusades, pretty much, early medieval period. So all these sources are going to be from that time period. And the reality is, over there, the Jews are being killed in Israel. No one's settling when the Crusades are going crazy. The Muslims and the Christians are slaughtering each other. The Jews are just observers. When Jews in that time period talk about it, it is something which is much more theoretical than practical, although he himself moves to the land of Israel when he can. So to live there, he felt it was a mitzvah. The question was, if you have the ability to conquer. So here's what his grandson says. His grandson is named as the Rashbash. He says he has 3 responses that deal with land of Israel. And he says, number 1, he says that you don't have to travel to the land of Israel if it's too dangerous. And he says, number 2, he says, it's not a commandment which includes the entirety of Israel. It's not a general commandment, because we learned last week, there is this idea until the Messiah comes, not to rebel against the nations and not to go up in force. So it was never seen as a collective commandment of the Jewish people. It's an individual thing to make aliyah, is what his grandson interprets in his grandfather. Again, people will debate this. I'm throwing this out there to show the different perspectives, but we're not going to be locked into this, because we're going to find a universal principle that will allow us to really deal with all the problems. Okay, number 3 is, he says, this is what kept many great individuals from making aliyah. He says, but it's fitting for both the layperson and the scholar to try to make aliyah. But he says you shouldn't be compelled because of the danger that's inherent, and since it's an individual obligation. Okay, so One approach that would say, the land of Israel, you're obligated to fight and conquer. Others have big issues with that. Hard to find consensus there, especially not to fight. Number two, there is a biblical commandment, as understood by our sages, not to sell or give land away to idol worshipers, to Gentiles. The biblical text. The biblical text has a word in it that's understood three different ways. When the Lord your God brings you to the land which you are coming to possess it, he'll cast away many nations before you, more powerful than you. Verse 2, and the Lord your God will deliver them to you, and you shall smite them. You shall utterly destroy them. Neither shall you make a covenant with them, and not be gracious to them. So now, here's an important thing. The battles of the Bible are not necessarily the same battles that the Hasmoneans or other leaders of the Jewish people in the land of Israel had. There was a biblical commandment when you first entered the land, which was to tell the 7 nations. God tells the Jewish people, you are my hand to get rid of the 7 nations from the land. Their time, their sin has reached it. I'm not bringing a hurricane, I'm bringing you. Now you stayed in the desert 40 years until their measure of sin has been reached. Now it's time for them to leave. They could either become monotheists, they don't have to become Jewish, they have to keep the Noahide covenant, or they could leave, or they could fight you. Give them those options. But if they stay to fight, they can't stay in the land. You got to get rid of them. But that commandment is not understood by anybody, by anyone today, as being obligatory post that first invasion of Joshua and the settlement of the land. However, the second commandment, which is lo sechaneim, you're not be gracious to them, is understood in 3 different ways. We're just going to focus on one, just to throw it out there. There is, in the Talmud, it says one is forbidden to sell a Gentile in the land of Israel. Anything is attached to the ground. The Talmud says, where do we derive this from? In other words, things that grow while they're growing. Because the verse says you should not show them mercy. The Hebrew word mercy can also be read, translated differently. Do not allow them to encamp there. So in other words, this is Mishnah, oral law, which says there's a prohibition to sell to an idol worshiper in the land of Israel land to live on, and farming land. If you sell them farming land, you'll no longer be able to tithe and all that. So you're not allowed to sell to a Gentile or idol worshiper.
Or slaves.
What?
Or slaves.
Well, no, it doesn't say that here. That's a separate commandment. This we're saying here that you can't sell them land. Now, is that biblical commandment relevant today? Some people say it's idol worshipers, and the Muslims are not necessarily idol worshipers. They're monotheistic. Others say, no. Even a non-idol worshiper, they still have to be Noahides, which means they have to commit not to murder, not to kill, and they have to be resident aliens, which means they have allegiance to the Jewish state. Gentiles that live in the Jewish state, that have allegiance to the Jewish state, then you can send land to. Again, these are different biblical commandments that you might find on the right wing, if you will, of religious Zionism that will say these are prohibitions about giving up land. So very quickly, one other theme, biblical competing values, and then we'll get to the crux of the issue. To be Jewish is to have gratitude. We read about Yehuda being born to Leah, the 4th child, and she says, now I will thank you, I will acknowledge. The word Yehuda becomes the word for Jew, from Judah. To be a Jew is to acknowledge and be thankful. And people say, if God gave you with miracles the land of Israel, in 48, it could have all been over. In 67, it could have all been over. In 73, and God gave you land then. To throw it back in God's face? That is the ultimate of ingratitude, ungrateful. The problem with that is, that's a value, but there are other competing values. Here's a famous competing value that we say, even idol worshipers who live in your land, you should give charity to them in order that, for ways of peace. Peace is a great value. So just because gratitude is great, that's not enough of a reason to say, oh, don't give up the land of Israel, we have to have gratitude for God. It may be a truth that we shouldn't be spitting in God's face, but if, the biggest question is, if life is in danger, if by giving up land we can get peace, should we do it or not? So here's the key. I'm gonna read to you a line. This is from the laws of Shabbat, and then I'll share. You know what? Let me just share a. Let me share. Here it is. Bear with me for a moment. Gonna share this again, just so we have it. Okay, just so we do a little bit of overview here. Okay. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so the two-state solution, just an overview, withdrawal from territories, end state of war. So our next question is settling the land a biblical commandment? Nachmanides says yes, Maimonides says no. Rambam versus Ramban. Ramban is Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. Rambam is Ramosha ben Maimonides. Okay. This commandment of the Bible, you shall vacate the land and settle in it. So either, according to Nachmanides, he will say it's to the extent possible, not necessarily a war. You could buy land like the Jewish National Fund was doing in the land of Israel for many years before the state. Montefiore and other people buying up land from absentee landlords. The land that most of Israel was based on land that had been bought from these absentee landlords. And number two is a commandment not to return the land. The argument against it would be we're not allowed to conquer land in exile. Okay, these are the different approaches. So why doesn't he include it? Either because it's not relevant today, or others would say it's a rabbinic commandment according to him. But again, we're going to discover that one thing trumps everything. So some people say Maimonides doesn't do it because it's not applicable in exile. Exile means that you're in the nations of the world, and you're not going back up in force. Going back up in force is overturning the whole vision of the Jewish people, that they're exiled and God will bring them back to the land. That's one interpretation. Again, others disagree with this. I'm just giving different approaches. Specific to the generation entering the land, or it's a counsel, not a command. Okay. Do not make a covenant with them. You have a debate. Is it for idol worshippers, or is it only if it is not applicable to monotheists? If your belief in one God. Okay. I think we're almost there. Okay, the next issue was gratitude versus peace. So each one has a value. If we can have peace, why not make peace? Okay, so this idea, if we're all creating God's image as well, there's an idea of trying to do what we can for other people. Okay. The challenge is that we have security experts, not from right now, but over the last 20 years, 25 years, that have been saying things like this. Now the whole paradigm is changing, but they were saying Israel's security becomes secured through parting ways with Palestinians. Others say it's a problem because you can't defend against future military threat. Our retaliatory capacity is reduced, increased likelihood of subsequent attack, invites terrorist infiltration, many other reasons why giving up endangers life. So let's take a look for a moment here at our text again. So I'm going to share again the text. The text here is from Maimonides, but the laws of Shabbat are suspended, it's reading number 13, in face of danger to life. And he says here, it's forbidden to hesitate before transgressing the Sabbath laws on behalf of a person who is dangerously ill. Because the Torah tells us in number 12, in verse 5, in other words, number 12 reading 18:5, you shall observe my statutes and ordinances which a man shall do and live by them. I am the Lord. There's a mitzvah to live by the commandments. Now, what does that exclude? If you're told to kill somebody, to murder somebody, or to worship idols, or to commit adultery, then you have to give up your life. But otherwise, you're supposed to live with the commandments, which means all the values we spoke about before, if it's risk of life, leaving aside the one element of war to conquer the land, if it's risk of life, that always takes precedence, like we find with the laws of Shabbat. So here is Avadia Yosef, former chief rabbi of Israel, and he, before the Oslo Accord, he said, number 14, if the heads and commanders of the army, together with the government, state that saving a life is involved, then if areas of Israel are not given back, the danger exists of immediate war on the part of the Arab neighbors, and if the areas are returned to them, the danger of war will be averted, and not just the danger of war being averted, the chance of permanent peace, then it seems that according to all opinions, it's permitted to return areas of Israel in order to achieve this aim. It says nothing is more important than the saving of life. So this idea that nothing is more important than the saving of life is without question a central theme in Judaism. It does exist. And here, let me go back here for a moment. I'm going to share just a short video making the argument about, again, not from a religious point of view, but some of the dangers inherent. This is way before what has happened in Gaza. But there are people that were saying this as well all the way through. And they're not the only opinion, of course, because you have military experts in Israel who have taken both sides of the coin. And we're going to analyze them in a minute. And we're going to talk about why Jewish law gives value to one over another. And that's going to be the crucial linchpin of the class. But here, let's watch this. At least it covers these issues.
Every state has the right of self-defense and to secure borders to protect itself from hostile invasions and terror. Israel is a small state surrounded by Arab countries 650 times its size, some of which are large bases of global terror. Only 44 miles separate between the Jordan Valley and the Mediterranean Sea. After the Six-Day War in 1967, when Israel was attacked by 4 armies on 3 fronts, United Nations Security Council Resolution 242 stated that Israel was entitled to new defensible borders to replace the previous fragile lines from which it was attacked. What are Israel's defensible borders?
In the interest of the 242, it also says Israel will withdraw. They negotiated this back and forth, and Israel was so proud of itself that it got that one line in there that what the defensible borders are, which allows for them to interpret and to debate. But it wasn't clear because in 242 it says Israel has to withdraw. How far you have to withdraw? That's the question. To what was called by Moshe Dayan Holocaust lines, the Holocaust borders of 1967, that was the debate. Okay, let me just let that person in. Oh, hold on. Okay, but the point is,
what are its essential security needs? The Jordan Rift Valley, Israel's eastern frontier, forms a natural barrier between Israel and the countries of Jordan, Iraq, and Iran. The Jordan Valley rises from an area that is 1,200 feet below sea level to a hilly ridge of up to 3,000 feet, creating a steep 4,200-foot virtual wall opposite any force attacking from the east. The growing threat of global jihad activity near Israel's borders requires it to prevent infiltrations of terrorists and weapons. When Israel left the Philadelphia corridor in Gaza, it became a highway for the infiltration of terrorists and the flow of hundreds of tons of ammunition and weaponry from all over the Arab world, aimed at Israeli civilians. The Jordan Valley is the equivalent of Gaza's Philadelphia corridor in the West Bank. To defend itself, Israel must retain control over the Jordan Valley. This is Israel's mountain ridge, rising up to 3,000 feet. It dominates Israel's major coastal cities, where more than 70% of its population, 80% of its industry, and all of its airfields and seaports are located. Missiles launched from the Judean hills pose an immediate threat to Jerusalem, Israel's capital. Israel's only international airport, Ben Gurion, would be in the range of even primitive rockets, while all planes taking off and landing would be threatened by shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles. More advanced weaponry would be able to hit virtually any point in Israel. If Israel were forced back to the 1949 armistice lines, the Green Line, the country's width would be reduced to a narrow 9-mile waistline that would be impossible to defend. That's why any future arrangement must include Israeli control over key areas of the mountain ridge and a demilitarized Palestinian state. Israel's narrow borders means a combat aircraft can cross the entire country in under 4 minutes. In less than 2 minutes, an enemy plane could penetrate the country's airspace via the Jordan Valley and reach Jerusalem. In order to thwart an aerial attack on Jerusalem, a hostile plane must be shot down at least 10 miles east of the capital to prevent it from crashing into major population centers. Therefore, Israel must be able to identify hostile planes before they cross the Jordan River line and intercept them shortly after. To defend itself, Israel must control the airspace over the West Bank. Israel's transportation arteries, and in particular the Trans-Israel Highway, enable travel and connection between Israel's regions. They also assure the mobility of the Israel Defense Forces in case of attack. Protection of these vital arteries is essential in order to ensure that 1. Civilians aren't victims of terrorist gunfire. 2. Regions of the country cannot easily be cut off. 3. The mobility of Israel's defense forces is not hindered in the case of invasion. To defend itself, Israel must control its main arteries of transportation. There is enormous uncertainty about future trends in the Middle East. Iran is determined to become the supreme power as the U.S. withdraws from Iraq. No one can guarantee the future of many of the current regimes in the region. Today, more than ever, it is crucial to ensure defensible borders for Israel.
Okay. Let me close this. Maybe F11. Not sure why. Oh, here we go. Okay. Let me go back for a second here to our PowerPoint here. Okay. So what we had here was this issue of unable to defend. Wait, did I share it? Everyone can see? Okay, I think so. Okay, so here we are in our text. I gotta share the other screen again, sorry, new share. Let me find this. Let me close the, bear with me everyone. Here we go. Close that one. And we are, that's where we are. Okay. Let me share that again. Here we go. One more time. Sorry about that. Technology. Here we go. Okay. This is a crucial issue. I know everyone has the handout, but the issue is like this. We said that the primary concern in Jewish law is protection of life. Protection of life. Now, there's no question we're talking about life and death issues right here in the state of Israel. The question becomes, number one is, who is the arbitrator of what is considered a danger to life? This is what we have to determine right now. Jewish law says like this: if there's a danger to life, you give up Jerusalem. The danger to life, if we have an ability to make us more safe by giving up Jerusalem and we're going to save lives, you give up Jerusalem. If you're coming from a vision of the Jewish homeland and Jewish history and all that, you keep everything. But if you say to save life, now, the argument that's clear from every military expert, as we'll get to, is, and this is what's very important to be able to thread this needle, is that we are not taking into consideration other things. We're not taking into consideration international pressure. We're not taking into economy. We're talking about one simple thing. Is my life and my friend's life or anyone's life more in danger by you giving up this control of this land? That's the only question we're dealing with from a Jewish law perspective. Everything else are variables that don't impact the question about life being in danger. So for example, if somebody said, I have a hospital and we don't have enough funding. let's let a few kids die on TV, and then a lot of people are going to donate money and will be able to give much better care for everybody else. That is not, it might be okay for some people's moral compass. That's not okay from a Jewish point of view. You deal with the here and now. Who is in danger by me doing any one thing? And that's what we're looking at. It's a very narrow and it's very precise. We're talking about life and danger. And the right for someone, for example, to have a state, I just want to deal with for a moment, is, first of all, from a Jewish point of view, according to the Torah, the land of Israel belongs to a Jew. If anyone steals, it's not good for them. It burns a hole in their pocket. To give the Arab the land from a biblical point of view, we're not doing him a favor. From a biblical point of view, we're giving him God's land that was meant for Jews, and we're giving it to the Gentile. We're not helping him. It's not good for him spiritually or physically in any realm. It's not good. Nevertheless, maybe we should give it up for peace. The question is, do we endanger life by giving up strategic depth, by giving up control of border towns, by giving and allowing murderers or potential murderers or people you don't have control over? We've witnessed in real time the transformation from nationalism to Islamic fundamentalism in my lifetime. How many other transformations? Do you remember the Arab Spring that the West cheered on so beautifully? The Islamic Brotherhood, Hamas's father, mother, spiritual center of being, took over Egypt. And it was only because of a coup d'etat that they lost it, to the sorrow of some in the West. The Arab Spring brought these Islamists into power. What could happen in a minute? Jordan could fall, Egypt could fall, Syria could fall. Oh, Syria fell 3 times already. We would have given Syria the Golan Heights. Where would it be now? Terrorists shooting down all the time. No defensible boundaries. So here's the thing. Jewish law, 2 things. If you look at the numbers here, number 16 is the text. I just want to be able to cover these 3 questions. Number 1 is, I started with number 2 first. We are dealing with the present. This is how you have to figure it out. Future variables don't have a bearing when it comes to the laws of saving lives now. Yes.
Sorry, but,
Please.
So here, that's sort of for me an interesting question because, okay, so you are saving lives now, but potentially endangers even your kids' lives, right? So you're saying, okay, I'm going to make that sacrifice, I'm going to withdraw, I'm going to make peace, I'm going to, do all the wonderful things, and maybe I'll save my life, but that would mean that my children's lives will be very endangered because they're going to live in the world where...
But you're endangering yourself now. My point is, and the Rebbe's point you're going to see is, that everyone would agree that since tomorrow it can change, that means your life is in danger too. You cannot have non-defensible borders. You cannot have non-control over the enemies coming in. You have to control that. In other words, that is exactly the point. That is called risk of life. That's not a future variable that might or might not happen. At this moment, by giving this up, right now, you are endangering, and we're going to see it even deeper, that when it comes to border towns, there are unique laws in the Talmud and in Jewish law. Which is, I'll just cut ahead of myself, which is a border town, even if Gentiles are coming just to get straw, and not even in Israel. In Babylon, if you have a Jewish neighborhood, and they are coming to steal just straw, they just want to get some wood and straw for their animals or something, you go out on the Sabbath armed, because if a border town is conquered, the entire land becomes open for conquering. So Jewish law says you cannot give up border towns because it's a risk to life just by virtue of opening it up. So there's 2 things. There's the clear and present danger that every military active expert will admit to. Active. I'm saying 3 words. Military, active, expert. Without political considerations. The big challenge is many of the military in Israel are soon to be politicians. Many of the politicians were military. You ask the guy, not the spokesperson, you ask the guy in the field, does Israel become easier to protect by leaving Gaza or harder to protect. No, not is it worth it for your moral fiber that you're occupying another nation. No, not is it going to become too hard for the mothers that want to have peace finally. No. Is Israel going to be safer? Without question, every one of them, but if you narrow it down, we'll say no. But maybe we'll change to technology and make fences like we did in Gaza. Maybe we'll rely on airplanes, not on control of the ground. All these maybes are not said by the man in the field. See, here are the 3 points the Rebbe says. He says here, all non-pikuach nefesh is the word. Pikuach nefesh means life at risk. So all non-pikuach nefesh have to be excluded from deliberations. And here's the code of Jewish law. On Yom Kippur, if someone is fasting and he feels sick, he says, I want to eat, but it looks like he's not well. You ask the doctor. You don't ask the doctor, should he eat or should he fast? You ask the doctor, is his health, his life in danger by fasting? If you're asking the doctor who's a Gentile, should he fast? He says, no, eat 3 meals a day. That's not my question to the doctor. My question is a simple question. Is his life in danger? If his life is in danger, you don't fast. Even if you have a doubt about it, you don't fast. But you have to ask the expert in the field. It doesn't matter if you're Jew or Gentile. So the code of Jewish law accepts experts in their field, not retired experts, and not external reasons such as, I don't think fasting is good. I don't believe in your religion anyway, the doctor says. I don't like Yom Kippur, it gives me trauma. Those are not reasons to listen to the doctor. The doctor has to say one thing, is the life in danger? And that's what we ask the doctor. So take a look, number 18. Who are the decision makers, if a doctor or not? We have different opinions. If you look, and we'll do a couple slides, if you look at most 90% of the arguments given to give up land, it is not that it will make Israel more secure from a danger to life, but rather economically it will grow. It will be a demographic issue, which are all sorts of variables. Everyone thought the demographic bomb was over for Israel, and then 1 million Jews come out of Russia. Changed the whole situation within minutes in 1990, which transformed the PLO too. They were on the back foot then. Oh, wow, a whole transformation. The point is, all sorts of things can happen in the world. And here's the point. When it comes to saving life, you can't rely on the maybes and coulds and the rosy interpretations of hopeful, or can I say, messianic thinking. Part of Perez and these people wore a messianic thinking. We're in the new Middle East. The world is ready for change because you have the talking heads that know what to say. I always say, go to memory, go to the Arab-speaking stations that translate what the Arabs have been saying consistently. What Arafat was saying in Arabic was not what he was saying in English, in different stations, different places. You could read, they were saying we're going to do the salami method. Now, even if he wasn't saying that, even if he was Luxembourg and he was coming to straw, Jewish law says you defend on the Sabbath and you go out for weapons. Even if you're thinking of it, you go out and you preempt them because you cannot give up a border town because it makes the country easier to conquer. How much more so when we have a track record of 100 years of whether it was Arab nationalists, Arab secularists, or Arab fundamentalists, who many of them are trying to conquer. It doesn't mean all the Arabs are bad. It means there are enough bad people and not enough good people that are guaranteed to stop them. So far, the track record hasn't been good. And even if it was good, you still wouldn't be able to give up that to protect the lives. So here's a code of Jewish law, and then we'll do a short video from the Rebbe. Regarding non-Jews who besiege Jewish cities, if they come for money, we do not desecrate the Shabbat. But if they come to kill or come with no presented reason, we go out with weapons and desecrate the Shabbat. In a city that is near a border, even if they just come for straw or hay, they're stealing a little bit. We desecrate the Shabbat. They're coming. Even if they haven't come yet, but they want to come, the code says. We go out there and we fight. We cannot give up border towns. We conquered the land of Israel through coming through Jericho. It was a doorway. When you conquer the border, you get in. Where's the weak spot? You're in. We saw what happened with a border town. We saw what happened without strategic depth. We saw what happened without the Sinai. What we could have done if we still have that. Now, let's go a little bit. Let's do a video here. Here's I copied, you're not to read now, but a long letter back and forth. Lord Jacobowitz, who was the chief rabbi of England, he lumped together the Code of Jewish Law approach with religious Zionists, and he said the reason why some religious Jews are against giving up land for peace is because they value the land more than they do life. And the Rebbe had a long back and forth showing that nothing to do with the holiness of the land. I would give up Jerusalem if I knew for now and for future we would be safer, okay? That's not the point, because the point is safety and security. And here's the beautiful thing. This approach allows for a much more unified Jewish approach, because everybody in Israel, the left and the right, want to be protected. The question, and want to save lives. And the more right now, they all see the clear and present danger. Not everyone. There's still people that are holding on with their fingernails to the myth of a two-state solution, hoping there'll come a time when we'll make them non-fanatical and re-educate. You're competing with many, many, many other states who are radicalizing for their own reasons. The Arab states had an incentive to radicalize. It detracted from their own shortcomings and allowed their people. In Egypt, the greatest peace treaty, the media and every organ of the state is filled with anti-Semitism. They have blood libels on their public TV stations, shows about blood libels. And they still get benefit from the peace treaty, but they want their people to be anti-Semitic. Doesn't mean it can't change. Things could change, but still doesn't take away from the fact that it might not change, and it might change for the worse. You have to be able to protect your people. If you can't protect your people, what are you worth as a nation? That's your first and only obligation, bare minimum. Protect your people. Otherwise, why have a nation? It's not to have a flag. It's not to have a nice anthem. It's to protect your people. If you can't protect your people, fold up and move on. And if you're going to endanger them, how much more so? All right, let's take a quick look here. I'm going to a new share. Let's see if I can.
When was that letter written?
This letter was in the 80s, I believe. It was around the Camp David Accords. So I'll look it up, but I believe so. Okay, so let me first have to find this. Let me go here. Sorry, bear with me for a moment. Here we go. Wrong one. Oh. I had it. Here we go. Okay. This is the Land for Peace. Now we're going to share. Wait a second. Sorry, I think I have to hit enter one more time.
In der Milchom, in der Azei gerufen, in Milchome, Sheshes Ayom, was Roh, Kollapse, Jores, als gewähren Nisim Glui, was das gedacht, aufheben den Orem, Neis Al-Hohorim, Neis Miloschen HaGbo, aufheben Iden, was sie heben, auf sehr Idischkeit, anerkennen, dass Anes Mina Shomayim, und Amatone Mina Shomayim im Malke Shaleila. Benele darfen dort gleich reinsetzen Niedigkeit, durch Malken Bote Knessis und Bote Medroshes, und Lahavdul Mikvoi Stare, Allahas Kame Vekame Yishu Veres Yisrael, ist Mura Zeb gekommen zu leben in Washington. Beten sich, wir sollen zunehmen, zurück, und das, was der Rebischer hat sich gegeben, mit Anes Golui. Ist der Nitid, was sie gewähnt von Chassidim Israel, und durch ihn gewähnt der Leben belochen, besorgen, Biyad Hashem, hat nicht Masken gewähnt, auf das zunehmen. Was war der Tam, gesagt, ich kann auf Gemine nicht, und auf Gemine sagt der Ingen von Meise Huayike, wo das gewähnt der Nes, Betech Nes, hat die Nitiden haben nicht gewollt zunehmen. Die Matone, was sich Achmonel lang geworfen, mit der Matone, Shala Kodesh Baruch Hu. a viel an der gefindt sich in Zmana Golos, a viel an der gefindt sich in Chutzlores, in der Rosen von der Mebersten, a beschaße kommen zu gehen nicht hin, und sagen, als sie will nehmen, zunehmen bei jedem Teven Vikash, bei jedem, was leben in Chutzlores, und sie redet sich wegen Aschettich in Chutzlores, und sie redet sich wegen Teven Vikash. In der Brede der Eben Habechen, kedei wissen, was mir darf tun, steht in Shulchan Aruch Dvorim Brurim. Aber mir darf nicht ankommen zu Chochmas Bosser Vadam. Und mir darf nicht ankommen zu seinen Pschäppler. Und mir darf nicht ankommen zu seinen Svoris, worin der Rebester hat Tiber gegeben hat, zu Anoshim, Smuchim, Mish mit Peish von Moshe Rabbeinu, was Mesore Lishu und dann noch Dera Chardei bis zu dem Beis Yosef und dem Ramor Shulchan Aruch, und sie haben gesagt, dass ich in Afkemine nicht, was sie mir bett und was mir bett. Eibs ist auch Schasch, als die Posach Horetz Lifnehem darf man sich stellen mit Neshek, a viele Bishabos und a viele, als sie mehr nicht, wie man Maschmischen und Boi. Wo der Pfarrer mir kommt zu gehen und man will lernen in Abschad, aber nicht war im Amurim, Eibse, Akum, Shezor al-Israel. Also kommen zu gehen mit Azovo und mir stellt weg am Mozir und mir sagt, er ist gekommen le Milchoma und die Milchoma ist auf Nehmen, Teven Vikash. Na schenken aber, er mir sagt, er ist weggestellt, setzen bei kallig dicken Tisch. Uns wird sitzen ein Dritter dabei. Und jener wird patschen über die Plätze und wird sagen, als helfen beten und helfen dem Kach wie Kach, hat das Geschachtes nicht zu dem Dien. In das Heper von das bis Josef, und Heper von das Ramo, und wir darf das nicht ablernen von Seher Mosen, von Ese Klären, sie schreiben befehlig. Aber der Taf, was wir darf nehmen, Neshek, in jeder Fall, die zu bewohnen in der Milchoma. Und jeder Fall, die zu bewohnen, aber soll bleiben, patschen sich auf die Plätze und nicht schlagen sich einen mit dem Zweiten. Der Tam ist auf zu bewohnen, scheleit die Posech, Hore zu Lifnei. Und gefragt nach, hat dort gar nicht gedacht, umkommen. Mortlich hat viele gesagt, dass einer hat gesagt, dass darf haben Teven Vikash, hat gleich mäßig gewählt. Als der Bruder und der gute Freund und wird sich rechnen mit das war Acherim von anderen, mit die andere Humis. Und jene Humis haben gleich gesagt, dass sie willen nicht nur die Posach Horetz lefnehmen, sondern sie willen Kol Horetz. Und der Moderit Shebehem, wir haben sie angerufen, der Misunim Shebehem, haben befehligt gesagt, dass sie willen ganz Jehude und ganz Shemrein und ganz Asa und Jerusalem Atika und dann noch werden in Trachten, Zime soll machen, Sholem Amiti, Zime soll trachten, was mir soll demult tun.
Rebbe's warning before this whole thing started.
Was Koomura, Azami, Maimi, du Master, gefinnt sich in Chutzlores. Sagt der bis Yosef und der Amasse kein auf Gemini nicht. Zime kommt zu gehen mit der Chayil, mit Anschisover, oder mir kommt zu gehen mit Diplomaten, oder mir schickt das durch ein Schlier, durch ein Memutze, oder mir sitzt bei kallerdicken Tisch, nicht bei Sode, nur in einer besonderen Binyan und mir trinkt dabei Tee und mir esst als die Jude und mir klappt sich auf die Plätze und mir kuscht sich und mir sagt, Och Achim Anachno v'chulu, in der einzige Pchine, durch alle Unionen seine nicht Teufels Mokim zu wissen, dem Psagdin, der einzige Pchine ist die Posach Horetz lefnehem, Zinit. Wir koomura fila, das Ressach wegen Chutzlores. Allah has kame v'kamo, wenn das Ressach wegen Eretz HaKedesh, wo dort noch mehr Negehe, der Kasch wird eben noch mehr Negehe, jeder Schal, Mitzad Ruba, dort seien Lieden in ein Horn ist zusammengeklebt, in a Schettach, Kotten, Lifierach, und Rachmone Litzlan, Episch, Lechi, de Boyi, I das nicht, das riecht on der Pizron, ist a Kodesh Borcho, Bein Israel, Mefuzel und Mefeilet Bein Hami. Nur dort gefinden sie sich a Ribu, kein Yilbu, Biyachad, und a Sakone von Tipose Choretz Lefleer. In Niederpschat, als eine gefindet sich in Sarmatie und des Weiteren in Barbarie, wie der Leschene Semedisch ist, sie gefinden sich alle in dem Schettach mit Zunze.
So the land of Israel, in a way, paradoxically,
My name is Yitzhak Tzad, and I'm the director of Living Torah.
more dangerous
We're pleased to share.
by virtue of the fact that they're living in a small land, relatively close together. That makes a big issue about security being even more careful than it is with other areas. Let me see if I have another one. There we go. I have one other one. Bear with me for a moment. Here it is. Okay, we'll do that after we do a little more of the, let's just go back to the slideshow. Here we go. Share. Okay, so what we said was, sorry, going back, immediate danger, deciding factors. We're excluding anything that is not relevant to clear and present danger about life and death. Number two, immediate danger overrides potential danger, and the military has to be consulted as a security expert. Then we have the other idea, which was about the border towns being, in particular, the weak link for survival of the community. In theory, that law applies to Brooklyn too, that if you're going to be in a neighborhood where there was white flight and the old people are being left behind, you needed people to have security out there. You needed, whether it was the JDL or the Maccabees or different groups before. I'm not talking about JDL later on. I'm talking about initially the poor elderly that were stuck in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, as everyone fled to the suburbs and crime was taking over. There was an obligation to protect their lives. How much more so in the land of Israel? Oh, this obligation about being there, doing what you can, always exists. You have to protect lives. When you have a community like Israel, where everyone's in this one place together, we see what happens when a border, God forbid, is broken through. The Rebbe was warning this for 40 years before we're seeing the disaster right now that has happened. That, God forbid, a Holocaust could happen if he didn't like talking like that. But the reality is, if what we did to Gaza, we would have done to West Bank, and we didn't have the Golan right now, it would have been over, God forbid. Hordes would have come in, and they would have done, what happened in Rwanda. You don't even need sophisticated weaponry. 1 million people chopping people up. It doesn't take much. It's quick. It's fast. Enough for everyone to have lost their will. We have to recognize where we're standing here. Okay, so the fact that we do have military experts and politicians that we're promoting, again, right now I think minds are changing because the whole paradigm has changed. But nevertheless, the fact that you have them, if you look at their reasoning closely, the issues are, they're mostly, these two are not so clear, but mostly it has to do with demographics or without our isolation process will deepen, where the West is separating us, we're gonna have to be occupiers of other people, etc. So these elements, but the more pure you get to security, the more pure and clear it is that giving up the land is not helpful and is detrimental and is dangerous. And it's clear, it was clear in 1980, the Rebbe spoke very vehemently with the Camp David Accords. We gave up oil to Sinai for a piece of paper. Egypt just needed a win. The reality is Egypt, Sadat gets assassinated by the Islamic Brotherhood. It could have switched in a minute then too. Aside from that, the first ceasefire, the second ceasefire, every peace treaty they made, Egypt broke right away. Israel turned a blind eye. They didn't want to make a big deal out of it. And the reality, there hasn't been war. Well, there hasn't been war with Syria either. Now, and Egypt could have switched in a minute. And we see what happens, not just with Egypt, but other countries. Plus, it emboldened all the other nations to think that the way you get peace with Israel is by them giving you land. That became the norm. The Palestinian state was already put in the Camp David Accords with Egypt. Egypt put it in because it wanted to look like it wasn't just worried for itself, that it was worried for the Arab brothers of the Palestinians. The reality is they didn't care. They just needed a win to show that after all these wars, we have something. But Israel gives up oil that they are paying Egypt $3 billion over the next couple of years to buy the same oil that they had. So they gave up what is needed for war. They gave a strategic debt for a piece of paper that Egypt itself said many a time we could rip up in a minute. It was going on with when the Islamic Brotherhood was running it, and other times as well. Okay. So the many statements of military that ceding land causes present danger. Again, one could look and you could ask this question. Active military personnel. The problem is in Israel, like every democratic state, the political echelon makes the decision. The army, if it talks, is out of place. It's not your place to talk. The army has to ask us, the political echelons, according to Jewish law, have to ask with the rabbis a very simple question to the military echelon, the active military. And the question is, does giving up land make it more difficult for you to protect the lives in Israel or not? That's the Jewish law answer. Again, we're not going to convince everyone that has different approaches, but if someone wants to know what the Jewish law answer is, that's the overwhelming Jewish law. There are other side issues. God gave you a gift, don't spit in his face. You're not supposed to give up land. But all that fades in comparison to the big question about giving up land for peace that endangers, just by virtue of giving up the land, it endangers people. It emboldens the terrorists, and it makes it easier for them to hurt and harm and kill people. And that's clear. And the reality is you're forced to have more wars. So even the Arabs are losing more lives. And we have to worry about them too, in the sense of if you act weak, you're going to invite attack, in particular in a place, in a nation that exists in the neighborhood that it does. But everywhere in the world, how much more so there, especially these countries. If you see the reason Saudi Arabia wanted to have a peace treaty with Israel, because Israel was strong. The minute Israel's weak, we're not so sure if we want that peace treaty. I don't know if it pays. I don't want my street upset at me. I don't want the world upset. It's a paradox here. If you're strong, I want a peace treaty. Do I need your peace treaty? I need your pressure. If I'm the one who's strong, what are you bringing to the table? If you run away so quickly like Saudi Arabia, like the Arab Emirates. If you're fair weather friends, what do I have to put out to risk for that? That's a big question. It doesn't mean there isn't room for diplomacy, but diplomacy is through strength and not to delegate your security to anyone, not to America, not to the UN. We have experience with the UN. The UN, they pulled back as soon as the enemies wanted to attack. Hezbollah was supposed to be demilitarized. That was part of the agreement. The UN did nothing. The worst thing, useless, because they become human shields as well. Okay. So the defensive depth throughout the West Bank, it's tiny, cut in half in minutes, God forbid. So we have to do military and security expert. Reason is based on security. We're not asking politicians what they think will be best. How do you want to be remembered in history? We don't care. How you want the world to love you? We don't care. You can hate us, but we want to live. Our economic situation may have some challenges. Okay, those are variables that we have to deal with. And you know what? If Israel's being at the edge of cutting-edge technology, even its enemies were looking for peace with it. Again, no guarantee. Islamic fundamentalism or nationalism can have a rebirth. I mean, Islamic fundamentalism can continue, and Arab nationalism can have a rebirth. Or even Arab left universalism in the West can have a rebirth. There are many things that can endanger Israel. The thing you have to be able to do is protect with a strong military the space, the air, the land of your people. That's the first obligation. I want to close with a video. So Torah establishes society and principles. Currently, those principles dictate the sea land constantly present danger across the board. If you're going to have some miraculous change of things changing around, you have to ask the military that simple question. Are we endangering lives? And then here's the question. Why give up land if there's no longer a danger? The whole reason you're giving up land is for peace. There should be no war. If there's no war, there's no reason to give it up. It's your land. God gave it to you. If there is danger, But the danger is only if you don't make peace. That would be a conversation. If the world would change in a miraculous way. But no way the world has been for the last couple hundred years is there a situation where Israel's going to be safer by giving up land for peace. And we see this clearly. It's not even a question. So if everything would change and that ceding land would guarantee higher presence, in some weird world, in some alternative universe, yes, life comes first. That's true. But life comes first, and that's a reality, and that's an absolute. Are we saying that we have to hold on to Jerusalem? We have to hold on to the West Bank? Only because giving up land endangers lives and brings in terrorism and weakens it. Of course it's our land. Of course God gave it to us. So that's a secondary level. Once we accept that giving up land for promises of peace endangers, so then you bring in all the other issues as well, gilding the lily. You know, a little extra sprinkles on the ice cream. But it's not the core point. Core point is safety and security. And that's something that can unite people. Okay. Here's the problem. But people say, Rabbi, what's the solution? What are you going to do by the time the world isn't perfect. You don't have to get a solution. Not everything has to be resolved. There are problems. You can't resolve everything. You want to resolve something? Resolve healthcare in America. Oh, we can't resolve everything. There are a lot of things that can't be resolved. You deal, the best of bad choices is the question. Okay, I want to share a final one, which is again the Rebbe. Yes. Someone had a thought? Sorry, let me close that. Not that one. Oh, I know why. That's why. Okay. We'll close with this.
Alle wissen, an der gefindt sich noch in Golus. Wo der Vater die Stochen, wo der Rebischer hat noch nicht umgekehrt von der Soll, die Gwulisser ist alt, ist gerade bei uns. Und das aber, wo der Rebischer hat sich schön Geld gewährt und noch gegeben, die Schussung, Shall Israel ist der Rebischter dort der einzige Balabos und hat das Siebel gegeben in der Nachla Selber. Weil Avrom, Yitzchak, Jakob und die Kinder und Einiklach. Und bedarfte Nehm und bedarfte Scholem, weil man das in der Derech HaYechido, zu Scholem Shal Kayomo und Scholem Shal Emes. Noch in Zman HaGolus und auf Druf gucken Reis Israel. Wenn Jeden anheben erzählen, wo sie trachten, wo Israel verstehen, wie Jid darf trachten, wenn er geht, Israel. Und also Hitler am Reden mit der diplomatischen Loschen und schlagt sich an, öfter wirst bei ihm zunehmen, bei Jeden, noch ein Stückchen und noch ein Stückchen. Wo du wird man nicht kein sein. Und mit seinem verschrieben werden an dieser Jid-Zedek wie Jescher. Jid-Zedek wie Jescher, wie Chulu, sei wie sei gelebt in Niedergott. Nur rechnet, als sagt, dass ein Bepe und nach dem nächsten Machure Apargut, mit Gabe oder Liebe, und aber redet nicht mit der jüdischen Loschen. Redet auch mit den Loschen, was mit der Esses mir weiß, der Techen ist aber genommen von Kehl alle nieder. Wo das eine von Nikvise dem Schicher zum Sofkol hinjonen. Wenn Nasten mit Nekel alle nieder waren, der Rede für euch, der einzige Rede für die Goyschkeit, was sie da in Cholol Asmoli und was ist Mavchi da Jiden, aber der Goy tracht das Sach, was tracht gar nicht, weil er will, man soll losen zur Ruhe, hat genug eigene Zorres, wie sie gewähnt, bis ist ja du, klar mir Fursam, die Teusen, was am Mishaken gewähnt, Bitchene, Shalom Yisrael Kule, Adato, durch dem Chasmen in dem Chese, in mein Camp David, und für die Zeit, was von dem durchgegangen, hat man gesehen, die Zores, was man gegeben gewähnt, durch Chasmen in jenem Papier, wird alles aufgegeben, keine Sache nicht bekommen, nirgends. Einzige Sache, was man bekommen, 10 Liam soll geben als Mörder und Mörder. Und sie nie der Vater, dass es eine Nege, wenn Milchoma, alle willen schollen. Die Machlekes ist nur, zieh das in den Weg, was führt zu Milchoma, oder die Weg, was führt zu Schollen, weiß jeder Mensch, was kennt, der Tewe von einem Menschen. Aber schaß der Tewe, der Nitwa, wird schwacher, wird der Tewe starker. Aber wir will haben Achschiva, Tfisa, Smoken. Und wir will haben, es soll sich rechnen, bei Israel, mit Eretz Israel, darf Eretz Israel sein stark, in der Starkheit, mit welcher sie verstehen und rechnen mit sie. Beschaß man Tag gegeben, die Nacht, hat bewiesen die größte Schwachkeit durch Abnehmen dem Zoi bitochen Achi Chashuvim und Achi Ikrim, auch geben dort dem Zatsche Knegel, wo das hat gleich bewiesen, mit wem man handelt. Und wir kommen bei den Monen als Mehrer und man hat es als See getan und man hat nachlich gewesen bei sich. Obwohl darf man trachten wegen Milchoma, dass wir kommen bei kommen alle Unionen Milchoma. Nie das hat eine Karre gewesen, der Minion nach Scholem. Nie das hat eine Maid gewesen, Sakonis Milchoma, das hat nicht gewesen, der Minion nach Scholem. Warum keiner jagt sich nicht zu machen Scholem. Mit denen, was hat kein Kirch nicht. Und das, was man hat die Menuche dem Zmansche Bintayim, nicht Scholem. Nur die Menuche sind nicht Milchoma. Ist das nie der Fall, was man nicht gehabt, kein Brei, man muss auch geben die Nerv, das ist der Fall, was man gehasst mit dem Papier, mit nicht der Wege von Breges erhebt. Und dann wollte nicht gegeben die Nerv, wollte man Amerika machrier gewinnen, dem Tatsche Knegel, aber es soll Abfall, Piquet, Hasmen in dem Papier und nicht vielen die Milchomes, weil das Leute, was von Nazis abriss. Und nicht nur Leute, was das gewinnen der Hecher. Weil derich sehen alle Vituren, was man gemacht noch drauf, ist nicht der Pirush, aber das haben nennt gemacht dem Scholem, jeder Vitur hat gemacht schwacher, dem Zad, was hat mit Watter gewähnt, und damit weiß Kol Hoelam Kule, aber schau, der Zad haben mit Watter, wird schwacher, rechnet sich mit dem weniger, und mit Mund von dem Meere, und mit einer Eier, mit Tomer nicht, ist einfach Monel Schlam Milchom. Und beschaß mich Salzer beträgt, und ist nicht mehr wartet, oder demut jener darf haben die Menuche, mehr wie mit darf das haben da. Beim Net war im Amurim, aber hat noch etwas Kehr, Gashmi, in der Chateve, nicht Rachmanel Schlam, auch gegeben die Neft, auch gegeben die Stochim, Rachmanel Schlam, die Greize Chiste. Aber im Sdurge noch a Seifel Mann wird weiter aufgeben, noch a Schettach und noch a Schettach, was jeder Schettach hat in sich mit dem Psag, die im Boden, die Schulchenoro, die Postsache Horetz Lifnei. Und wie hier Rossinke mit Duber, man soll jetzt sein mit Reden wegen der Indien. Und Bepel soll sein, der wenn er sagt, ich soll im Boris, durch Ruhe, was mit sich verbinden mit Nischmasse der Reise, mit dem Ruach und der Nischame von Niedigkeit. Und mit keinem sein mit Trisser, Bepel, was am meisten hohe Ike, wird noch sein, ist Mama Golus, der Buchokeseit der Leiche, was mit Zweiseit die Schmeru, wenn er sagte, Geschmächen biete, wenn er sagte, Schol im Boris, warum sie wird sein, wo ehrlich Eschen käme Mius, mir wird stehen mit der Kemos Skufo, wo das ist verbunden mit Bechokeseit der Leiche und mit Zweiseit der Schmeru. Viele Sachen, die dem Emerson Psag dien, von Teras Emes, und damit wird man bekore Mamesh verrendigen, dem Einisch, was Golino Marceno, in Chutzlores, und Golino Marceno von Niedigkeit in Eretz Yisrael, Rachman el-Islam. Mit dem Pachat, was man hat vergoyen und Vergoyigkeit, und wird stehen, bekäme Skufa, bechol in Yone Teiru Mitzvesel. Ve Adrabe, wie Rashi Tatschlof, Shetia, Amelim Beteiru. Und der Limut wird sein, der Almenas, was Mitzvese Tishmeru, was Isem Esom, wo das beweist, aber ehrlich Eschem Kememis, auf der Kemes Kufa, Amitis, und man wird gehen bei Jod Rome, und bei Kemes Kufa, verendigt in der letzte Regoim in Golus, und bei Kabel sein Pnei Mishiach Zitkenu, Bigula Hamitis war Shleimo.
So the Rebbe spent a lot of time at a Hasidic gathering. Okay, let me just do the last paragraph just to close with it. The last thing is Rabbi Avadia Yosef, who was the former chief rabbi, who had been a bit of a dove traditionally, because in the eyes of the politicians, because he had said give up land, but he was saying give up land because he thought, based on the government, that the government was saying would bring peace and that would save lives. In other words, it was the same central core about protecting lives, but there was maybe a misunderstanding of the application of it. But he thought, based on what the government was telling him, and a lot of times they did not report the truth, that everything would become hunky-dory if you just gave up land for peace. So after Oslo, he says, the last reading in 21, my dear brothers of Israel, residents of Judea and Samaria, let me move that up, sorry. It is my intention to make clear my position concerning Judea and Samaria. I've explained more than once since my halachic ruling that giving up land for peace has no validity in light of the current situation. I had intended only and purely ceding territory if it leads to authentic peace, one in which Jerusalem and the surrounding be secure in peace and quiet. But now our eyes see that surrendering our holy land causes a danger to life. This is not the prayer for the peace for which we prayed. Therefore, the Oslo Accords are null and void. I speak peace and they come to war, says King David in Psalm. We have no one on whom to rely other than our Father in heaven. So, what we have here is, just to recap in one sentence, the approach of the Code of Jewish Law is leaving aside, is the state of Israel messianic? Leaving aside, is it a mitzvah to conquer the land today? Leaving aside if the nation state should be able to have protect borders that are their own, like every nation state. It's not about that. It's about protecting of the civilians and the citizens. And by doing that, you protect even the enemy's lives, because they are not motivated by you trying to turn them into vegetarians by feeding the tiger meat. That's not what happens. When you give a little, you give a finger, they eat your hand. That's the reality. And in that neighborhood, for sure. So the reality has been over. This is in the 80s, before it went crazy. This is before Oslo. This is, this is before all that went down the tubes, where we were throwing everything, hopefully, please, Arafat, and miraculously, and the Rebbe said this more than once, the Arabs refused to take. That's the miracle. God put their heart in his hands. We had the freedom of choice to screw up our lives. And we were trying to do that, some of us, by endangering, like Sharon actually did with Gaza. What Sharon did with Gaza turns out retroactively to have been a crime. He may have had all sorts of intentions. We don't know. He had a stroke not much later. And no one knew what else no one knew what his inner thoughts were. People tried to extrapolate. The point is, not to speak ill of the dead, he did many good things as well. But I would just say the reality is that these things have endangered. And we're still endangered, not just Gaza. There's other things in the West Bank right now where, because we gave up certain things, has made it much more difficult. However, the hands of kings are in the hearts of kings are in the hand of God. All sorts of things can change. All sorts of things can happen in the world that make it better for us to protect lives and to be strong and to speak resolute and with absolute certainty about what is right and what is wrong, and not necessarily to play a political game out of a place of weakness where we assume, like with a fluttering leaf, that someone's chasing us. Much of the time, we have internalized the exile mentality. The Jews in Israel, not to speak ill of anyone, many of them did not feel the land of Israel truly belonged to them. The first thing Peres said in 67, when the 6-Day War, when they conquered Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek writes, Peres said, how are we going to give it back? There was no sense of, wow, God has given us this as a gift. Again, that's not the only motivation. The core motivation has to be protecting lives, but there has to be a connection to your Jewishness so you recognize these things. And that has been happening. Israel is becoming much more of a Jewish state, not just a state of the Jews. We're seeing movement. With God's help, it should be without further bloodshed. It should be strong, but the strength should come from a strong inner sense of the value of protecting life, not endangering, not taking risks for peace, and not every time that the peace process blows up in your face do you say, oh, those are sacrifices for peace. No, you sacrificed on the altar of peace these people's lives. And you could have had a stronger, safer, annexed territory with resident aliens. The Israeli Arabs right now are not revolting. They're comfortable, and they're not a detriment. Of course, we have to do what we can to alleviate discrimination. The Rebbe once told this Sadiger, a Hasidic Rebbe, who was speaking about the birth rate of the Arabs, that maybe we should not be giving all these incentives in Israel for people with children because the Arab birth rate is growing. The Rebbe said Arabs have to have babies too, according to the Torah. Be fruitful and multiply, God tells Adam and Eve. That's not your concern. That's not our problem, so to speak. Your concern is to make sure they're not a threat. Does that mean we have to help them in any way we can that does not threaten our life? Of course. Do we have to do something about the crime in the Arab community? Of course. But that doesn't take away from making secure and firm borders. Right now, Israel is in flux. Where it will go, I don't know. But the value, just this core value, the life takes precedence, and the people who have to ask the question to are active military. Active, not those who are political and not with political issues and other extraneous issues. You gotta drill it down to the core. Is life at risk? Is life at danger? That would be the core of Torah's viewpoint dealing with it today. The fact that in Deuteronomy and other places it speaks about killing enemies and conquering land, the vast majority, because someone asked that, the vast majority of Jewish texts understand that was for the time period when they conquered with David. We are not in the Messiah right now, where we have to conquer all the land that was promised. And with God's help, when the Messiah comes, it will be in a way that everyone will see the truth, and they'll be very happy to be able to give the Jewish people back what belongs to them. But if not, so God will run things differently. But right now, we're not with the Messiah is not here. What we have to do is protect lives. Our mitzvah is not to conquer new lands, whatever it takes, not to endanger more lives of our own or others. Simple questions, which again, things have changed because they've given things up. Like the question, do you go back into Gaza? They're back in Gaza. Do you go to the south? Right now, they have to get rid of Hamas. Once they're in there, what do? That's a very interesting question. What will make Israel safer is the only question. Only question. What will make the Jews in Israel safer? If it means reoccupying Gaza, that's the right thing to do. I'm not a military expert. I'm not even a rabbi expert in this field. I'm just an observer. But if the question to be asked would be that question. And from what I'm reading and what I'm seeing, as an armchair expert, it would seem to be that to control the borders and the interior, the borders in particular, are imperative. We gave up the Philadelphia route, and that allowed an ocean of weapons to be flowing in to Hamas. And the same thing is with other parts of the West Bank, which we're right now controlling to a certain degree. But in Lebanon, we don't have control of what's flying in from Russia, what the Wagner group is bringing, what others are bringing, China, Iran. We don't know what's happening. They know some things are happening, but we don't have control. So there are things that Israel has to do to be able to defend and protect. That's the core value. Any thoughts before we close this talk, which I survived the two-state conversation. I was not, any thoughts before we go? All right.
I have a thought.
Yes.
It may not be popular, but I'll say it.
Say it anyway.
The whole conversation about a two-state solution seems almost pointless if you don't have two sides that want that.
Correct. But even if you did, it would have been a lie. Imagine if Arafat would have pretended. He could have pretended. He was given Jerusalem, and he was given 99% of the West Bank, but he couldn't bring himself to say, I accept. Imagine if he would have pretended. He was afraid to get killed, or afraid to be forgotten?
They have proven that they have no interest in peace.
Correct, but the question is,
And they've proven that for the last, what, how many years?
right, and even more, but the question becomes, what happens if someone does pretend? How about if the new people come in after Gaza, because the whole world is pushing a two-state solution, and you get these people say, we're moderates. They're the Trojan horse, because you don't know, even knowingly or unknowingly, we don't know who's coming down the pike. Because this place could turn in a minute.
You aware of the car bomb that just went off in Niagara Falls?
No.
Look that up.
Oh, yeah. Here in America, car bomb?
Yeah, that was not terrorist.
Canadian side.
That was not.
The Canadian, the Mounties will take care of it.
What did
It was US
I
side?
think it was,
Yeah,
right on the bridge.
It was not terrorist.
It's not a
And
terrorist.
they weren't sure.
The last time
Okay.
the FBI said they're just looking into.
Look, the reality is all these things like suicide bombing and things like that, they tried out on Israel first, and then they spread it to Iraq, and then they spread it all over. Although the Tamale Tigers did it a little bit, but in general, the Islamic fundamentalists, all hijacking planes, everything starts out with Israel, and then the rest of the world gets it. So Israel has to be, in other words, the world has to recognize, if you don't stop what's happening in Israel, what's being done to Israel, these chickens come home to roost, so they spread. I don't think chicken roost, they spread. These things don't stop. And you know, they have to be stopped in some way. Question is how, and how do you change those things? All right, good to see everyone. Anyone has any emails, they can email me questions. Yes, Sandy?
Say something positive.
Please.
No, you say something positive.
Positive is that right now, it could have been, this doesn't sound good, it reminds me of a joke. Here it goes. It could have been so much worse if we had given up more. Now, right now, this terrible thing, 1,400 people and soldiers in there. But right now, the mindset, I believe, of the people I'm speaking to who weren't raised with me, like me, with the Rebbe's talks. I remember in 1980, I was in 3rd grade, and my English teacher came into our yeshiva. He was a secular Jew, and he was so excited about the Camp David Accords. And I was like, what? You're excited? You didn't hear what the Rebbe was saying? Like, I didn't get it. But the point is, the world today, the secular Jew recognizes that they're not just coming for Jews in Israel, they're coming for us. Number one. Number two is, in Israel itself, the Jews who wanted peace, the most liberal, dovish people were the ones that were massacred. This is the most literally, they would bring this woman who was so many of them, they would bring the Arabs to the hospitals, and they had their houses and addresses. People that lived in their home for 30 years wrote maps of the whole kibbutzim. So the point is, there's a wake up right now that they have to be able to protect themselves, and they have to be able to make defensible borders. And thank God the Arabs didn't fake it. Thank God Arafat didn't fake it, Abbas didn't fake it, and they can't control themselves for a minute. If they would be able to condemn October 7th, we'd all be bowing down to them. They can't even say that. Thank God. These idiots, Hamas says, we're going to do it and do it again, and do it again, and do it again 1,000,000 times, they say on national TV, on BBC. I mean, what kind of gift is that? I mean, either God's controlling them, or they're really insane. Or I don't know who they're talking to. They're talking to their people who they think they'll excite and wake up. But the reality is the world is hearing it, and they have cognitive dissonance, and they ignore it. But we're hearing it, and it's very hard. How are we going to crawl out of this hole and try to re-embrace a vision of giving up land for promises of peace and endangering the lives? There's a wake-up call. You have to protect and defend, and you can't put up with a terrorist state on your backyard. You can't. With God's help, that's the wake-up call. We'll see how they deal with, next week we'll deal with hostages, which is a very complicated issue in Jewish law. Leaving aside, all these things, leaving aside the questions about actual policy in Israel. But we have a history of hostages and the challenges of hostages. And again, we'll be able to explore some core ideas that illuminate whether it's sanctity of life, not giving incentive for people to kidnap and kill, free murderers, all these type of issues will come down. But positive, I believe there's an awakening of what it means to be a Jew in the world. I believe there's an awakening of what it means to protect lives in Israel, and what it means to be a Jew in the land of the Jews. A child, B'nai Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael. I believe that, you know, and we just have to tap into that too. We also are called to the reserves in the sense of, are we living more? Are we part of this people? And in Israel, they have to go and serve in the army. Here, what do we have to do to be part? It's by doing our part, both politically, but also Jewishly. Because it's who we are has been revealed. Everything's been ripped away. The veneer has been ripped away. The veneer of civil society has been ripped away. Our allies, who we were there for in every dimension, has no empathy, not even sympathy, not even shame. It's scary. On the other hand, to be confident in who we are and have that is something to be said too. Not to go around being afraid of our shadow. You know, we do live in a good country here that does protect its citizens. Do we have to push them to do more sometimes? Absolutely. And we have the ability. We vote, we donate, we have connections. Everyone should. But I do think the confidence issue is an important element, important game to play. That we shouldn't be hiding who we are. That's our job today. So forward, march. All right, to be continued. Good night, everyone.